Thank you for listening to the Open Discourse Podcast. I'm Charles Mitchell, co-founder and CEO of the Open Discourse Coalition. In this series, normally, I interview some really interesting people. In today's episode, it's just me. And I'll tell you why. It's January. Many people have wished you a Happy New Year. At the risk of being rude, I don't want to wish you a Happy New Year. Instead, I want to invent a new phrase that will embody the work of our organization this year. I want to wish you a Civic New Year. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you haven't done the math yet, this new year that we're in, 2026, is a big deal. Not just because it's a new year or because I now have two teenagers at home, although both of those things are true, but rather because it's 250 years since 1776. Specifically, on July 4th, it will be 250 years since the independence of our country was officially declared, announced, promulgated, and all of the things. Of course, in my hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That has a lot to do with the programming that we're going to be doing this year, and have already started, by the way, this academic year. And I wanted to take a few moments in this special episode of the Open Discourse Podcast to share with you the ways that we are making sure that this will be a very civic new year. And I hope by the time you hear everything that we're up to, you will join me in wishing people a civic new year, because in fact, we're making that true together. Now, I have to give you the bad news at the beginning. The bad news is not nearly enough is being done to take proper advantage of the wonderful opportunity that we have in 2026 to honor the founding of our country and talk about the principles for which it stands. There have been various efforts to prepare for this year. I've actually been involved in some of them in other organizations beyond ODC. And I wish I could say that I really thought our country was ready for this year. I don't think we are. There are some really good people working on it. Some of them are my friends. You may recall that a few months ago, I was asked to represent ODC at a meeting inside the White House complex about this very topic, and the person who's running that effort inside the White House is doing a fabulous job. So I'm not criticizing everyone, but I do think overall we just have to face the fact that not as much is being done as we would hope. And that's particularly the case within higher education. The kinds of history that need to be talked about this year are increasingly out of fashion. I'm the holder of a history degree, so I love history, and I've worked in and out of higher education and education policy for decades, and I've seen this evolution away from teaching and studying military history, away from teaching and studying intellectual history, away from studying and teaching political history. It's a real thing. There are increasingly not even professors studying and teaching these disciplines to our young people. You could accuse me of getting into politics by bringing up some of these things, but I don't think that this is a political statement. There is a civic purpose to education and to higher education. We are supposed to be preparing citizens who can participate in this American experiment that was created 250 years ago. And even if you don't agree with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the documents that undergird this history, you should at least know what they are. You should know where they came from. And that is, I would argue, part of the civic purpose of higher education, is to teach those things. Whether you agree or disagree is another matter, but you should at least be informed. Increasingly, the people who are going to be inheriting our democratic republic have not learned those things. And if that sounds like an overstatement, well, let's drill in a little bit to the work that ODC is doing and the need for it. There are a number of programs that we've begun to execute this academic year that we've learned since starting to execute them are the only programs being executed for the benefit of Bucknell students in conjunction with the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. Let that sink in for a moment. No one else is doing anything. I wish that weren't so. I take no pleasure in pointing it out, but I think you, a listener, need to know that's a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. We've known that the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country was coming for a long time. Not enough has been done in the years leading up to it to honor it properly. That is what it is. So what do? We don't just complain. We don't just bellyache. The ethos of our organization is to get busy and do something about it. So there are three things that we're doing about it to make this, in fact, a Civic New Year. First, another guest on this podcast, you'll meet him later this year, is Father and Doctor and Professor Paul Sievers, Professor of Literary Studies at Bucknell University. He's offering 2 courses for credit on America at 250. The first was this past fall. It was called Telling the Story, looked at a narrative history of the American Revolution, actually a book that was discussed in a previous episode of this podcast with Judge Susan Crawford, books by Rick Atkinson, wonderful historian, not as well known as Bucknell grandfather David McCullough and some others. If you don't know his name yet, you should know him and you should buy the book. The students read that book and basically looking at the story of America through the lens of storytelling. Paul is a professor of literary studies, after all, considering how the story of America frames and shapes our ideas about our country today, looking at contentious issues in the spirit of open discourse. Really wonderful opportunity. And by the way, a pretty new thing that we in our independent nonprofit have been able to incubate, support, fund, birth, etc., a course that actually is for college credit. That's a wonderful thing. That is continuing this spring. The America 250 course is called the Founding Documents as Literature. So what does that look like? The students are going to read and discuss the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, selections from the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers, and the Gettysburg Address. This is the way Paul describes it, as a kind of literature that has helped shape national narratives and poetics that help shape a myth, good or bad, of America. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That is exactly what students should do. And here's the fact. There would be 0 courses about that if not for the Open Discourse Coalition and Father Paul Sievers. I'm glad we could step into that breach. That is a quarter credit course for a couple of dozen students. More should be done. Okay. What else are we going to do? Well, if I were you, I'd be listening to that, not only saying, yeah, I agree, more should be done. Of course, I would agree with myself. Yeah, this is the trouble with a podcast. You start agreeing with yourself. In addition to that, I'd be saying, oh, man, I kind of wish I could go back to school. I'd like to take Father Paul's course. I'd like to read or hopefully reread those documents. I'd love to hear what other people have to say about them. Well, do I have a gift for you? Because when I heard about Father Paul's course, I said, yes, of course, we want to support that. We want to make that happen for Bucknell students, and we have. But we also want to share it with many others. You shouldn't have to be in college in 2026 in order to have some of the kinds of conversations that I just sketched out. And for that reason, Father Paul, with the support of the ODC, has taken what he's offering to these students and created a discussion guide that can be used by anybody. It can be used by you. And by the way, if I know you and if you're an ODC donor, you're going to be receiving a copy of this discussion guide. And I hope that you will eventually have many copies. and that you will gather a group of your friends this year and make it a very civic new year by reading these documents for yourself. You don't have to have a PhD to read the Declaration of Independence and to lead a discussion about it. People have reading groups. People have Bible studies. This is the same thing. A group of non-experts can get together and civilly, I suggest applying a glass of wine. We're not in college, so we can do things like that. All right, lubricate the discussion a little bit. Nice glass of red, and ask these kinds of questions. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the questions that Father Paul suggests is, how was the American founding exceptional and why? Another one, what evidence is there for reading issues of race and economic class into the founding of America? I mean, just take those two questions. He's not broadcasting a right or wrong answer. There are people who are, maybe predominantly from one side of the spectrum who talk about the exceptionalism of America. There are people from the other side of the spectrum who tend to talk about issues of race and class in society. We should talk about both of those things. We should make up our own mind. And that's why it's on our website. You can find it there if you're hearing this and you haven't yet gotten your copy in the mail, or if a friend forwarded this to you, you can print out a PDF. You can start your own discussion group. And I really hope that you will. I'm totally serious about this. This celebration of the 250th can't just be something that the president or his staff or the Congress and the commission that they created or government bodies, all of those things are important. I'm glad that they have gotten going and they're doing important work. But I don't know a single private citizen who has brought this up to me at the turn of the year. And that's part of my basis for saying, not just in higher education, not just in government, as we sit here today, as of now, in our culture, this idea, this opportunity, this celebration, this occasion, it doesn't have the resonance that it should yet. That's okay. It's still only January. We can do a lot, and that's why I wanted to put these ideas out there now. Last thing, I said there were three things. Last thing that we're doing at the ODC to take advantage of this opportunity. I mentioned that across the historical profession, there's less and less emphasis on political history, intellectual history, and military history. If you wanted to go hire somebody in those disciplines, which not a lot of universities do right now, it's even hard to find somebody because increasingly they're out of fashion in terms of what people want to study. So what do you do? This is one of the things I'm really thankful for about this organization. Not only are we entrepreneurial and agile, but we have a generous ethos. And there's a gentleman I've had the good fortune to come to know who lives locally to our headquarters in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He lives in Northumberland. His name's Harry Lewis. And he's a New York lawyer, has some family heritage in the Northumberland area. He decamped from New York to there. He's very, very active in the Joseph Priestley Society. It's a story Harry can tell you as to how that all happened. But it shows just the short version of it that I've given you thus far today, his passion for history. And he is a self-taught local historian. And he's not just knowledgeable about Joseph Priestley. He's one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met about the founding and about the military history, the battles in the Revolutionary War. He's actually the person who turned me on to the book that I mentioned earlier, Rick Atkinson's Histories. He's written two, and he's got a third one on the way, of the Revolutionary War. Well, look, that's one of the best things that I think a friend can do for a friend is curate. Harry didn't write those books, but he had the knowledge to say, this is a great one. You should read it. Another resource that he's brought to bear in the program I'm going to tell you about in a minute in more detail features a multiple-time speaker who's come to Bucknell with the help of ODC, a guy named Alan Gelzo, also happens to be a friend of mine, I'm privileged to say. Alan is a Pennsylvania guy. He taught at Eastern University and then Gettysburg College and then Princeton University, and now most recently, through the leadership of Ben Sass, He is a professor at the University of Florida. I would say Alan is the most eminent historian of the Civil War who's alive today. He would blush if I said that, and he'd talk about some friend of his who, he thinks is better because he's that kind of humble guy, but he's the best of the best. He also is incredibly knowledgeable about the founding and has a series of lectures that, oh, by the way, you can listen to yourself it's a curriculum that you can buy online, you can listen online, you can buy the CDs. Well, take all these resources through the leadership and curatorship and his own expertise of Harry Lewis. We have created another seminar called The Ideological, Cultural, Economic, and Military Origins of the American Revolution. Started it in the fall semester, continuing now in the spring semester in the actual 250th year of the founding. Of course, when we started, it was the 250th anniversary of some of the battles, because the battles started in 1775. And that's being offered not for credit, but for a very dedicated group of Bucknell students who, in addition to their normal classes and everything else, are taking on the responsibility of reading the book, listening to the lectures, and delving more into the kind of history that is hard to get these days. But thanks to Harry's generosity and leadership, we're able to offer to Bucknell students. Last semester, there were about 30 students who showed up regularly for the seminar on their own time. We'll see what happens this semester. It's in February. It's starting next month, and we're recruiting students right now. Again, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We've seen this important occasion, the year 2026 coming. We've seen that there's a dearth, whether you want to look at the historical profession or inaction of certain parts of the government or whatever you want to say. We saw that there was a problem. And in our own way, we want to be part of solving it. We found ways to solve it for Bucknell students. We've found ways to solve it for a broader audience, including you. I look forward to hearing all the stories that I hope crop up in 2026 of people who are affiliated in one way or another with ODC, spreading the word and starting their own American Revolution discussion groups. And who knows what else we're going to do, because if there's one thing I know about this organization, it's when we see a problem and we start talking about it, we don't just talk about it, we do something about it. And I'm sure that there are going to be more ideas that come out of our organization in 2026 as to how to make this a very civic new year. So I hope with all that, I've proven the point that should be our aspiration, and maybe that should be your greeting as we celebrate all that there is to be celebrated in 2026. If you want more about all of the resources that I've shared today, they're all available at opendiscoursecoalition.org under student programs. Students are our prime customers for these programs, but if you're listening and you're not a student, like I said, the discussion guide is for you. Knock yourself out. If you really want to go deep, read the Atkinson book. I'm reading it right now, and listen to the Gelzo lectures. These are great things that I'm thankful we can give more exposure and a bigger stage to the ideas that produced the country in which we are blessed to live today and which we must preserve for the next 250 years. So Civic New Year, and thank you again for listening to the Open Discourse podcast. This is made possible by the generosity of the Shearer Group of Companies in State College, Pennsylvania. If you liked it and you want to keep it going, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and consider making your own gift to support our work at opendiscoursecoalition.org/donate. Thanks again for listening to the Open Discourse podcast. This podcast is brought to you through the generosity of the Shearer Group of Companies in State College, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to keep it going, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and consider making a donation at opendiscoursecoalition.org/donate. See you next week.